welcome to another Railway Laser Lines how-to video series, and this is our latest kit, which is the security kiosk. Now I'll just quickly run through some parts with you. There will be a parts list with the kit, but let's just quickly go through some parts and what they are and what you need to do in regards to priming and painting them. Now there will be two options for the security kiosk. One will be a standard one, the next one will just have the additional safety railings and false floor, which is engraved tiles. Apart from that, they'll be the same. So obviously the base for the railings will be slightly wider to have those on. So let's go through the parts. So the base, you'll need to prime and paint that in a concrete color. Then we come over to the skeleton framework, the four walls. Now there's an engraved line on the top of these, about 3/4 of the way up, which shows they are on the outside. And this is where the upper panels will go. These will need priming and painting on both sides. Whether you decide to paint it the same color on both sides is entirely up to you. The one that I designed and based this off, it was grey on the outside, but I'm going to paint it white on the inside just to make it nice and light. You will need to mask up all the little notches, noggins, etc. So when you come to glue it all together, you've got a nice tight fit. If you don't, you might need to do some sanding on those. So we'll do a bit of masking up on the tops and sides, paint that on the inside, then we'll allow it to dry. You might need to sand it after doing a couple of coats just to get a nice smooth surface, and then do a couple of top coats before then we'll start adding windows, etc., and then finally painting the outside. To go inside is a false floor. It raises the floor up slightly to the door just so you don't step in and go straight down. This is engraved line, so you can paint this and have the look of the effect of floor tiles. The standard one will come just with a blank floor. You've then got the additional of the security railings that will go around the back of the building and to the side by the door. Again, these will need to be painted. Now if you're going to be painting these in, say, a silver or black color, you most probably won't need to prime them. If you're going to paint them in a yellow, then I would certainly suggest priming them white first. Yellow doesn't seem to go too well on our model board straight away, so it's certainly worth painting them, or should I say priming them white first. We've got our roof base. This doesn't need to be glued on. This is just pushed on the top to give your building the correct spacing at the top. We'll then be adding the false roof over the top to match the side panels that go on the top of these on the upper sides, and it will give a nice flush fit, and it allows you then to lift the lid off so you can furnish your security cabin. We've got the exterior bottom framework, so these will be required to be painted. Again, if you're going to just paint them grey, a grey primer will do exactly what I'm going to do to the outside, grey primer, and that will be it, apart from the upper panels which go above on those etched lines. I'm going to be doing those in black and the roof in black as well. You've got a door here, and then the door parts for the exterior and inside are here. The outside door part is wider because it actually sits over the door frame. It looks as though it's actually closing onto the frame, and the small one fits on the inner side of the building. You have your windows, so there's 2 windows for each one, because obviously then there'll be the glazing which will be sandwiched in between. Now the glazing has a backing on the front and back, so they need to be peeled off, and it's worth then cleaning it with IPA to make sure you've got no grubby finger marks on them before you glue them into position. A window frame for the side window, window frames for the window near the door, and 2 small windows that will go over the top of these 2 here to look as though you've got opening windows, and you could position them in the open position if you wanted to, but unlikely that I would do that. Then you've got the exterior frames that go around the outside of the windows as well, and the main door as well. So that's all the parts. So it's just a matter of then putting them to one side and segregating them to make sure you paint them in the colour of your choice. Right, so I've moved a few of the items out of the way. So these are the items that I'm going to be priming first, and I'll be priming them white. So the base floor I'm going to prime white. I might get a few matchsticks and just cut them in half and then put them in the holes of the security railings to make sure that we don't lose any width and depth to those, because they are pretty tight. So I might just quickly do that. The inner edges of the security building, we're going to need to prime all this in white. Now these are the backs, and they do unfortunately get a little bit of burn marks from the honeycomb in the laser. Now if you want to, you could just spend a minute or two just quickly giving that a quick sand to try and get rid of some of the marks. It may help you when you come to prime it. I'm going to certainly do that. I'll spend 2 or 3 minutes just taking a few of the bits off. Then we'll need to mask up all the parts that we need to do, and then we'll give that a couple of coats of white paint, allow it to dry, sand it down, a couple more coats of white paint. The floor I will prime white, and the railings I'm going to also prime white. The roof, obviously the underside of the roof, so the burnt side, it's not too bad on this one. I will prime all this white. The roof on the top, it doesn't need priming because we'll be gluing the external roof top to this, so you don't need to prime both sides, just one side of the roof. So that'll be primed white, and also the inner small door panel, I'm going to prime that white as well, so the whole of the building on the inside will be white. So that's the first job for me. The other jobs obviously will be priming a lot of these panels in grey, and then the upper panels I'm going to paint those in a black primer. So give them a couple of coats of black primer, and again just need to do the one side, so the sides that's got the slight little burn marks on will go against the building, so you don't need to paint those, so they'll be painted black. And then obviously the outer frames and all the windows will be painted grey, so we'll do that as well. So first job is to go back to these. I'm going to quickly sand those, mask it all up, and they'll be ready for painting. Right, so I just found a spare piece of MDF that I'm going to use to put these on. Now I've masked up, as I said, so masked up the noggins on the tops and the sides, and obviously on these ones I've aligned up the masking tape all the way down, because obviously this is where it's going to join, so you need to make sure that that's covered. I have used Tamiya masking tape for this. You can use normal masking tape, but I just have Tamiya to hand and it's just nicer, so I've used that. So they're all now fixed to the MDF, so they're not going to blow away when they get painted. Just a couple of pieces of Tamiya masking tape double backed and stuck on the back of this. Same with the roof and the floor and the door. And then as regards to the railings, I've just got a couple of clips, stuck them on the end, and I can literally hold the clip and spray both sides of this white, and then just stick it up like that and allow it to dry for 10 minutes. And then once that's done, I can then paint them in the color of my choice, in which case this will be yellow. So this is the job to go and do these. So there'll be a couple of white coats on the skeleton frame, and also on the bases. Obviously I'm going to put some cocktail sticks in those holes as well before. Allow it to dry. I might use the benefit of a hairdryer to speed the process up, and then do another coat after that one, allow that to dry, most probably for an hour, and then they'll need to be sanded down, or at least the skeleton frame. Well, you most probably won't need to do those ones because you're going to be painting concrete color for the base. And the roof you won't see, the floor you're going to most probably paint a different color anyway. So we'll sand them once they've had a good couple of coats. That will bring it back to a nice smooth surface, and then we'll give them a couple of final coats, which should give us a lovely internal color. And then we'll think about adding the windows. Now the windows I am going to be painting grey, so we'll paint all the other parts that we need to do grey as well. Once that's dry, we can then add the window frames to the skeleton frame where applicable, and then we'll mask up again and then paint the outside, which might be a little bit more trickier. But anyway, these are ready to go and prime in white, and we're going to do that, and we'll come back when that's all done and show you. So while we're waiting for those panels in white primer to dry, we need to get these 4 upper top panels and the top roof on, and we're going to prime these in a black primer, or the colour of your choice, but I'm just happening to do it in black primer because I think it will stand out quite nicely. So they're ready to paint black. We'll paint those black, allow those to dry, then we could go back to the next coat on the white panels. And also these are the parts that we need to mask up and paint in a grey primer. Now you will need Tamiya masking tape for anything to do with model board. Normal masking tape will pull the backing of model board off, so be warned. Tamiya masking tape doesn't, providing you take it off very carefully. Model board is quite fragile, but it's also very strong. When you prime these, the decorative outside frames, we only need to paint the outside, and you might find that the best way to do this is to do light coats, and quite a few of them, rather than build it up quickly, because it will warp. It's a card, it's like a card stroke MDF, but it bends, but it's extremely good product. We use it all the time on our products now, wouldn't be without it. So light coats, allow to dry between, and you'll find that when these are dry, so they might warp slightly, it's just to put them underneath some weights for 24 hours to make sure they're nice and flat. So when we come to add them to our building, it's a lot easier. If they're slightly warped, just means you've got a slightly harder job to do. So allow these to dry thoroughly, put them under some books or something for a few hours, but make sure that the model board paint is dry before you do that. We'll be painting the outer side of the outer door, and then the window frames I'm going to be painting in grey. Now we need to paint both sides ideally. You don't have to. The only one you would need to do both sides are the main windows for the front, because obviously we've got two single windows that we're going to be using to go over the top. So as regards to the other ones, if you only did one side, when you add your glazing in between them and sandwich this one the other side, you most probably won't see the other side. But just purely for this purposes, I'm going to paint both sides of the window frames. And then you've got your three decorative outside panels around the frames. These only need to be primed one side, and again, because we're doing it in grey, it's going to be a grey primer. We don't need to paint it grey as well, no point. The only part we're not painting is the door, the main part of the door. It's engraved, it says door, because we're going to be bonding the front part and the back part to it. It doesn't need to be primed. So these are waiting to be done as well, so let's go outside and do those. It's quite windy today, so let's hope we can do this okay, and then we'll come back once that's all done. Right, so question I constantly get asked is, should I not varnish MDF first to seal it? Now, I've been making kits for 6 years now. I've never ever used varnish. I would rather prime the MDF, allow it to dry, prime it again, allow it to dry, and sand it, because it would give you a much smoother surface for the main paint to go on. If you varnish it, you've got to wait 24 hours for the varnish, and varnish has a matte sort of like gritty texture from what I've seen, and then you've got to paint over it. So are you going to get that smooth finish? Personally, I think no, so I've never used matte varnish, even when I come to do bricks. If I'm doing bricks, because of the burn on the edges, if I use enamel paints, it will go over it after a couple of coats, no problem at all. So the answer to that question is no. So just go ahead and prime. You might use extra bit of primer, but you're not buying varnish, so it doesn't matter. So that's had one coat, so I'm going to go back outside, give it the second coat of primer, allow that to dry. This is dry for about 20 minutes. We'll allow the second coat to dry for 20 minutes. Then we'll come back and give it a quick sand. Then we can give it 2 more coats of top white. In the meantime, we'll crack on and do the black and the grey primer as well. Right, so they've had their second light coat and it's dried. I've given them all a sand down, put the cocktail sticks in to keep the holes from blocking up, and now we're going to give it a good nice couple of coats to finish this off. And thankfully the sun's shining at the moment, so it can be outside drying. Might not need to use the hairdryer for rapid drying. So they're ready to go, so let's crack on and do those. Now that we've done the top two final coats and allowed that to dry, we've just taken off the masking tape on the sides. I haven't taken the ones off the bottom and top because obviously we're going to be adding the windows and then turning them over and then priming again on the outside. So leave those on, but we need to take these parts off. And I've left the cocktail sticks in as well because I should be giving this a coat of concrete paint, and it makes sense to leave those in. The ceiling's all done. The floor, I'm not sure what colour to paint the floor. Might end up actually leaving it white for the purposes of this demo. Anyway, so the next job is to paint the base in a concrete colour. That will give you time for that to dry while you're continuing doing other things. So I'm going to use most probably the round matte concrete paint. Seems to be the in thing for me at the minute. Seems to be a good colour, so that's what I'll do. Again, you don't really need to paint inside here because obviously you've got a false floor going in, so it's only really from the outside of these holes is where you need to concrete. No point wasting paint on here, so you could just draw a line or just kind of mask up if you want to, and then paint around the outside. So that's what I'm going to be doing next. Right, so we're waiting for that to dry. We can now move back to the skeleton frames. So we need the white side facing upwards towards us, and we need to get the windows, and we're going to glue these into position. So you would only need one. So I haven't actually painted the back, so I don't think we're going to need to. I'll find out in a minute. But obviously you'll see there's an engraved line on the front, which is the side you should have painted. The non-engraved is on the back. So we're going to be gluing that into the hole of the window frame, and you need to glue it in and then make sure it's flush with the bottom of the skeleton frame. So when you turn it over, it should be level with the MDF. So we're going to glue that into position, and we'll do the same with this window and this window. Then we need to go back and then paint the outside of these grey. Now it doesn't matter if we get grey on this because it already is, but we're going to mask over the windows to make sure that we don't get grey paint all inside the white. So hopefully that all makes sense. So let's glue the windows in place and then we'll move on. So we've added the window frames, they've dried, and now we need to remask back up again. So we're painting the outside of these in grey. Don't need to worry about the inside of the door. I've masked up on the inner side as well of these windows, doors, because I don't want grey paint going on the inside where we just painted white. So I've Tamiya masking taped around the windows, the doors, and then obviously then we masked up the noggins again. And at the top where we've got the vertical line where we're going to put the upper panels, I've masked up there as well. Obviously I've tipped these two upside down, so it doesn't matter, but they're all masked up. So it's this part that we're painting grey. We'll allow that to dry. We'll do a couple of light coats, then we'll give it a quick sand, and then a couple of final coats, and then we're ready to add the decorative framing and the outside. So let's crack on and do those. Right, so the outside has had 2 light coats of grey, and you will notice it will go all porous and horrible because it's drying into the MDF, so it must be sanded. But when you do this, obviously be very careful of your window frames that you don't catch them. So as you can see, that's all been nicely sanded, and the beauty of with grey primer, it does sand down to a really nice smooth finish. So we can get a nice smooth finish on doing the final 2 top coats of the grey paint for this. So that's what we'll do. So just make sure you do sand it down, otherwise you'll get a horrible finish. So they're ready to be primed and finished with the final 2 top coats. Not sure if the camera's picking it up, but I'm in the cabin at the moment, so obviously allowing these to dry. But these are the black panels and the roof. Now I have given these a light sanding. You might be able to see the sand lines, and I'm going to give this another couple of coats of black paint just to try and give it a better quality finish. And then they'll be allowed to dry, and then we'll worry about adding those later on. The grey panels, there you go, sun shining on them nicely through the cabin door. They should dry nicely and they'll be ready to put together soon. All we've got to do now is While we're waiting for that is we can go back to the security railings. If you bought the optional pack with those, they were primed white, and now we can paint those yellow. So I'll give those a quick paint of yellow. And there we have the security railings painted in yellow. Don't need much paint to put those on, and they're left in the fret, and they'll just stay there to dry. Just make sure you don't overspray it and got runs all down the railings, but they're as good as done. So at this point we're really in limbo mode. We've got to wait for everything to dry, so we'll be back very soon. Hopefully you've got to this stage where we've now taken off all the masking tape off the surrounding windows, the noggins, the sides, and you should be left something like this. And again on the inside like this. The black top panels and roof have been painted, the security railings have been painted. Now we need to add the window external frames. So they're not painted on the underside, these are model boards, so just a small bit of glue, the rocket card glue with the cocktail stick around the outside, and then we're going to place them around the edge of the window, lining them up with the inner side of the frames, and allow those to dry. So that'll be our next job. We'll crack on and do that. So hopefully your frames will look something like this. Just line them up with the inner line of the window, and you do need a good bit of light here to see what you're doing, and just use the other end of tweezers just to slightly move your frame around till you're happy with it in the correct position. And this is where I quickly do a dry fit to make sure that all the sides fit into the base, and the roof base fits as well. So nothing's glued in position, because obviously we need to do the glazing and the window frames inside. It's easy to do that before it's all put together, but we just wanted to make sure that this all fits, which it does. So happy with that. So we take them out, and the next job is to add your glazing and your inner frames. For adding the inner frames, we use the Deluxe Materials glue and glaze. As this dries clear, just need to use your cocktail stick, and all we're going to do is we're going to dab a little bit of glue and glaze in each corner, and possibly just a couple of little dots on the center panel as well. And we'll do that for the four corners of this window and the four corners of this window, and just maybe one or two in the middle. So we'll do that bit next. Just remember, on the main front window we've only got a half a glazing panel for the bottom part of the window, so don't add any glue on the top part of the inside here. Just add it to the inner side and the middle there, and glue that in position, because obviously on the front we're going to be adding the opening windows with their own separate panes. Whether you have them open or closed is entirely up to you, but just for inside we're only gluing the bottom part of this window frame. When you've completed adding the glazing, the next part is to finish off by adding the remaining frame on the inner side. So we're back to glue and glaze on this one if you want to, or rocket card glue around the outside. Rocket card glue is a little bit thinner, so it might work better because it's only bonding to the glass here. We didn't want any glue showing, and if we did, it would show clear with the glue and glaze. But hopefully if you're just adding it around the frame, put it in, we can go back to the rocket card glue, but use glue and glaze if you want to. It's entirely up to you. What we also need to remember when adding the internal frame is to only glue the bottom half again, because obviously we have no glazing in here, so we don't want this pushing straight in, otherwise it will bow in. So just glue around this edges here, get a flat piece of MDF or something, place it in, and then this should hopefully fit in then. So you'll have a little bit of a gap around, but that's not a problem, because obviously on the other side we're going to be adding some external windows on this top frame with their own glazing in, so it makes sense when I show you what we've done. So that's the next job, is to add the glazing to the inner frame of those two small windows. Now with the small windows, if you're going to have these in the open position, you're going to need to prime the underside of these, because obviously it will show at an angle. If you're going to have these windows closed, then you won't need to paint the other side. Once that's done, obviously we need to add some glue to the inner sides of the frame, and we're back to glue and glaze here, just to make sure we don't get any glue on the glazing. If we do, it won't show. So I'll add those and take the backing off the small piece of glazing, wipe them into my PA, make sure there's no finger marks on, put them into place and allow them to dry thoroughly, and then we can think about adding them to the building. But we'll most probably do that at the very last thing, because obviously we still want to make this building, put it together, add things, so we don't want to break these. So it might be worth leaving these till the very last moment, but we'll add the glazing. We also need to think about adding the door and its inner frame. So this is the only part we haven't really painted. So because we've added the decorative frame around the window, we haven't got a level surface. So we need to make sure that when we do this, that the window is off of any kind of base. So we're going to add the door in. Now we're not going to glue it in, not unless you want to. And then all we need to do is get some glue, add it to the back of the door frame, and then put it in position. And that's then done, and we know that's then in the correct position. So we will think about adding that, or if you want to glue it now, you could do, because obviously it'll be flush with the outside, and then when we come to add the outer external part of the door, it will be flush with the decorative framing, and hopefully it will look correct. So I'm going to just glue that into position on the door bit, and I think about adding the glue to the door once it's been completed, all the skeleton frames been added on. We'll think about the door and how we'll have it, whether we have it shut or open. Right, now it's time to fit the skeleton frames all together. So we've got our base, that should all be now painted concrete, and you're happy with that. You should have all your skeleton frames with all the windows done, the outside painted, outer frames, etc. So from left to right, so the door goes on the left, that way. Then you have the blank wall at the back, you have the main big wall window on the side, and then another one with twin windows on the front. So you'll need to glue these into position. So I add some glue to the sides of each of these panels and also into the edges, and then on the bottom we'll just add a little bit of glue on the base of these, and then we'll fit them in position. So do one at a time and then work your way around fitting them in there. You may not need to, once it's in, move the next one out slightly so it fits in, because obviously we've got fittings on the base and the sides. So if you suddenly then put that one in, you'll find that you can't log it in, so you might need to just push that out, pull this one out slightly to fit that one in. It'll be self-explanatory as you go along. And then once you've done that, is to fit the roof into position to keep the skeleton frame from moving, but do not glue this roof part together. This is staying loose because we'll be gluing a panel to the top of this, which will allow us to take it off, but this acts as the frame to make sure it all fits into these sockets. So that's the next part. We'll glue that all in position. I'll come back and show you when that's done. Right, so we've glued everything in place. Obviously, apart from that lid, it's not glued on, but it's there because we're going to need this in place for when we add the top panels. But before we do that, that's fixed down. Before we need to do that, we need to add the exterior decorative frames around the outsides. Now, the door side and the small window side, the decorative frames are the same width as this panel. The front and rear sides are overhanging slightly, so hopefully if you've made it correctly and not put too much glue or too much paint, then the side panels will match. So when you come to, so I would recommend starting with the door frame. So this decorative frame needs to go glued in there, and it needs to be glued so the edges match the edge of the skeleton frame. So you might need a small piece of MDF or something with a flat edge, so you can add, when you glue these on, is to literally move them right to the edge so they are flush with the edge of the skeleton frame. Once you've done that, then move to the other end and do the small frame, and then hopefully when you come to do these sides, they'll blend in and match against the sides nicely. So let's try that. Let's see what happens. I'll come back and show you when it's done. Right, so the decorative exterior frames have all been added, and hopefully they line up as good as possible. You're never going to get them 100%, I don't think, but there you go, that's as good as it's going to get. So the next part we need to do is to add these frames, and obviously these are going to be going on the top here above the decorative frame. Now you might just want to add the roof on top just to give it the correct height, and obviously then match it up with the height of this one. So again, I'm going to glue them in position, and then hopefully you'll see what I mean. But they're just going to be glued onto the skeleton frame. There's no paint, so they should bond quite nicely. So that's the next job. Right, so that completes the side upper panels. They're all in position. So all we need to do now is to fit the roof. So obviously this is going to go on top here to give us our top and blend it in nicely. So we need to glue this to this panel, but obviously we don't want to be gluing this panel, so we're going to add in glue on the top here away from the edges where it notches in. We'll add this panel on, push it down, hold it in position, allow it to dry. Now we need to make sure you allow this to dry thoroughly, and then the way to get the lid off will be to put your fingers through the door and push it up to make sure that you don't accidentally pull this off partly while it's not fully bonded. So once it's been on there for say half an hour, put your finger in there, push the lid up, and it should pop off, and then that way you know that you've got that on correctly. So that's our next job, is to glue the roof into position. So we allow the roof time to dry and say put the finger through the door and lift it up the roof. So that's now away. So that's going to be left to dry away from the skeleton frame. Now I've added the door to the outside. Now at the moment the door isn't possible to be left open. I may alter this for the kit. So all I've done is, because obviously on the original diagram of the image that I got inspiration from, the door is actually on the outside of the frame, which makes sense because it's got like a kind of steel door. So I'm going to need to slightly alter the bottom of the decorative frame to have the option of having an open door. It will mean having a smaller door at the bottom, but I think it actually looks okay closed. So we're done. So at the moment we've got to the stage where now everything's done. Now you might find you've got some finger marks or scratch marks or whatever around the building. Now this is the time, if you want to, again, to mask up. So you could mask up all the concrete floor, you could mask up the windows, mask up the window, mask up the window, and then mask up the outer panels and cover the top, and then you could give the whole thing again a quick blast of grey primer just to give it a nice blend. I think I'm going to try that. If I screw up, I screw up, but there's no reason why you can't. Obviously I'm going to use Tamiya masking tape to cover up the windows. I don't want any paint on the glazing. I did notice I made a slight error when I added the glazing on the inside. I had this piece upside down, so the glazing is at the top rather than the bottom. It just means that I've got to add my windows to the bottom rather than the top, but having quickly looked at them doesn't really make any difference. But on the real thing, the windows that opened were at the top. So I'm going to mask this up, and then I'm going to give it a quick blast of grey paint again just to blend everything in. I'll show you once that's been done how it looks. Right, so as you can see, I've masked up the base, masked up the windows, masked up the top panels, and I've used masking tape to do the top part. I'm not putting the roof on, just as long as there's no gaps from your masking tape, that's fine. And all I'm going to do is just give it a quick blast of grey again, just to give it a nice blend, and it'll all hopefully blend in, not too much, otherwise you get some runs. And then allow that to fully dry, and then we can take the masking tape off. Then we'll add the roof back on, and then we can add the security railings on and the inside floor, and then she's as good as done. And so we just come back from giving it a quick blast of grey, so obviously everything's covered. We'll allow it to dry that fully, and then we can take all the masking off. Now that we've given that a final coat, we've taken all the masking tape off and just checked around, make sure there's no overspray, which there isn't. So next thing is to add the false floor. Now for this purpose I'm not going to be painting the floor. It's unlikely it would have ever been white, but it will just stand out. So all I'm going to do is add a little bit of glue, plonk that inside, and then push that down to the floor, and then do that. And then last of all we'll add the security rails. So let's add the floor. So before we add any glue here, just make sure that your railings still fit in the holes. If not, push a cocktail stick through, or worst case, get a small drill piece and drill through. All I'm going to do now is add some glue on the end of the cocktail stick into each of these holes and around the corner as well. And then to join them up at the corners, I'll just add a bit of glue along the edge and make sure they stick together. So that will complete that. So let's do that, and I'll show you when that's done. And then we have our railings. So I've just glued those together there, pinched them together. They're dried. Make sure they're trying as level as possible, which I think they are. We've added the roof back on. So apart from now is finishing adding the front windows. We're near enough done. So let's add those windows. I think I'm going to put them in the closed position, to be honest. I think they're likely to break off if I don't. So let's add those. So we've added the windows to the front, and obviously I made a little error. They should have gone on the top, but to be honest, doesn't really matter. And then last of all, we need to just finish off by gluing in the door in position, and that's done. And then put the roof back on, and you've got one completed kit. Obviously, if you want to furnish it out, that's entirely up to you, but that's our completed security kiosk. Hope you enjoyed making that. Great, nice little kit actually. That's come out really well. That'll look good at any depot entrance on your layout. So there you go. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back with another how-to video soon. Thanks for watching, and take care. Cheers. Bye bye.